Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Edwin Ragas. I am the director of the Wasserman Center for Career Development at the School of Professional Studies. It's really great to see you, and thanks for choosing to spend your lunch hour with us if you're here on the East Coast with us to learn a little bit more about just real estate recruiting and trends and how to position yourselves for real estate roles. So with us today, we have three speakers, Jenna, Emily, and Romain. And I will turn it over to them to introduce themselves, and then we will get into a list of questions that I'll ask them. But certainly if you have questions as folks are speaking, feel free to use the chat box to type in reactions or follow-up questions, and we'll keep an eye on the chat box to try and ask those in real time if there's an opportunity to, but we'll definitely save time at the end for Q&A from you all, because we want this to really be beneficial for you while we have the recruiters in the room. So to start us off, I will pass it to Jenna to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Edwin, and thank you for organizing this as well. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to virtually meet you, and thank you so much for signing on today. If my Wi-Fi is unstable, just let me know. I am having some connection issues, so I don't know if that, just let me know if I freeze. But it's so nice to meet everyone, and thank you so much for joining. My name is Jenna Roth. I work at Macro. I am the associate manager on our HR team, and my role is I primarily oversee recruiting and hiring at Macro. From just base looking on the chat, it's so great to see so many of you guys are actually, in current programs that many of our employees at Macro actually are alum from. Maybe they also just recently graduated as well. So it's really nice to see that. And I'm looking forward to this conversation today. Just like a really kind of quick introduction on Macro. So we are a project management consulting firm. We are based in New York, but we also have other offices really all over the country. So there's a ton of different opportunities at Macro. And I'll say too, we are actively hiring, actively recruiting at the moment. I'm sure a lot of our conversation today will kind of get into what that is looking like. But we do have a ton of opportunities going on right now at Macro. We have summer internship programs as well. And we have a ton of folks at Macro who are actually graduates from programs that you guys right now are either currently enrolled in, writing about in the chat. So, I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation. And thanks again, Edwin, for coordinating this today.
Sure thing. Thanks, Jenna. I'll pass it over to Emily.
Yes, thank you, Edwin, so much for coordinating this. This is great. I just have a quick little slide. So just we'll share this for a quick intro to JLL and to myself. So my name is Emily Komendera. I recruit for our capital markets group at JLL. Capital markets is just one component of our business. I know on the second area, I know all of you are interested in real estate and a career in real estate, but there's so, much more to JLL than, just real estate. So we actually have a lot, within technology and corporate solutions as well. But as I mentioned, I recruit for our capital markets group. So we have two capital markets recruiters at JLL, myself and my colleague Shannon. I manage the East and South regions. And we are always hiring for analysts and associates. So we do currently have many positions that are open to, graduating students. Additionally, too, I always want to hit on, I, have a background in nonprofit and higher ed. So something that really drew me to JLL is our, corporate values. And I think sometimes, those can seem a little bit, high level and generic, but I've really seen a lot of these in practice. I talk about these a lot in my calls with candidates regarding, best employers for women, best employers for diversity. So really excited to meet with you all today, and let me just unshare my screen. I also wanted to hit on as well, we have a capital markets talent network. So I'm going to put a link in the chat, and this is the best way to stay connected. So, as I mentioned, we are hiring for analysts and associates. I'm going to send this link in the chat, and you can easily sign up for being a part of the talent network, and you'll be contacted regarding any opportunities that you could be a fit for. So thanks.
Thanks, Emily. And rounding out our speakers for today, we've got Romain Sinclair.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Romain. I work at Greysteel. Greysteel is a national commercial real estate brokerage that mostly sells and finances real estate, commercial real estate, hotel, apartment buildings, big focus on apartment buildings, and sometimes also warehouses and other sort of more niche asset types. I am a direct, I am a broker, so I am a little bit different from the other folks speaking today, in that I am directly in the field, and I am more on the hiring manager side, less on the recruitment side. So if you have questions about specifically about role specific questions, what is my job like? What do I enjoy about it? You can ask me things like that. My role is pretty cool. I like it a lot. It's very entrepreneurial. Brokerage is great. Similar to JLL. And I am looking to add some folks to our team. So some folks who want to sell commercial real estate. I am actively looking to hire about 3 folks in that segment. So that's it for me.
Good. All right, so thank you again for being here. We're going to dive into our questions. So to kick it off, maybe just to sort of like provide what the state of the landscape is, you know, in coaching, we'll hear from students and they're worried about what's out there for them, what's waiting for them, especially, you know, in a post-COVID market, or I guess we're still in it. So this question goes out to all 3 of you. How is hiring impacting your area of real estate? And maybe we'll start with in the order that we went in. So let's start with Jenna.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, and I could definitely speak about it in terms of macro and kind of what it really looks like for us right now at the moment. So it's definitely a really good problem to have right now for us, which is that we are really busy and there's really a lot going on and a lot of projects at the moment. So I'd say that for us, the current landscape it's very interesting, actually. It's almost a product of COVID, to be honest. In the beginning, a lot of our projects actually did go on pause, and right now there's a huge ramp up. Not only projects that have kind of been in the works, but a lot of new work as well. So it's actually a really busy time. There is a lot going on, and we're really looking to grow our teams. I'll say specifically, actually, really, it's kind of within this like younger talent. That's something that we're really targeting right now, a place where, you know, folks are interested in growing and kind of like learning and being there for the long haul. That's something that we're really looking to make an investment in right now. So, you know, for us, that's a little bit of kind of what it looks like, specifically within the New York market. And then, of course, you know, throughout other places as well. There's a lot of times candidates will come to us and say, you know, I went to school in New York, but I am interested in being in California. And we're like, great, like we have a ton of opportunities. So I won't limit it just to the New York market. This is really kind of the themes that we are seeing really all over the country. So an exciting time. And I think that this conversation today is definitely very timely and appreciated.
Thanks, Jenna. How about you, Emily? What are you seeing over at JLL?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think you know, coming into JLL earlier on in the pandemic, that was something I, you know, not knowing a ton about the real estate industry at that time, was initially concerned about, just seeing all of these articles regarding the real estate market and things being on hold because of COVID. And similarly to Jenna, there's definitely been a huge boom since then. And I think too, thinking about all sides of the industry as well. So since in capital markets, we're working with both the debt and equity and investment sales side. So from both sides of the market, things are changing. And because JLL has, you know, so many different arms to it, it's always growing and changing. And I think kind of looking at what corporate real estate looks like and reconfiguring, and there's been a lot of growth within like different markets specifically. So New York, we actually have just added on an entire new group in private capital. In Miami, for example, you know, multifamily is really huge. Industrial has been, you know, really, really big on the East Coast and in the South. So that's something I really encourage you as students to just kind of explore different trends in asset classes and what's growing, you know, as a result of COVID, because I think that that is something that's always really impressive, both to the recruiter, but even more so to the hiring team, to be able to kind of get into the nitty gritty in terms of trends.
Great. And Romain?
Yeah, I concur with a lot of what what we're hearing. You got to do your research in terms of the segments of the marketplace, the different geographies and asset classes within real estate. From my seat, the market is booming. Apartment buildings are a very interesting segment of the market because they are adjusted for inflation, because leases are only a year long. So if inflation goes up a lot, in theory, you can adjust a lease and coordinate the rents to sort of match what inflation's like. So multifamily apartment investing right now, if you look at the news nationwide, it's quite hot. And what that means is that those companies, either on the developer side, investment firms, more on the financing side, right? So the private equities, the banks are hiring a lot. On the brokerage side, I can tell you firsthand, nationwide, there's a lot of appetite. And in New York specifically, there's a lot of appetite. So I would say generally, the conditions right now are really ripe to start a career in commercial real estate.
Great. So that all sounds really promising. So thanks for that. So we talked a little bit about sort of where opportunities are and things to look into. So let's shift gears a little bit to talk about skills, right? So obviously the students are going through robust programs and studies here at NYU. So could you tell us, the hard or technical skills that are really in demand or that you're seeing more of a trend in the needs of your companies? Let's go backwards. Let's start with Romain.
Caught me by surprise. Yeah. So I think for my role, and maybe for some of the brokerage roles, it's going to be about that blend of analytical strength and relationship skills. I think commercial real estate is certainly like an industry where relationships matter, like many, but it's definitely very important. And in brokerage, you sort of double down because a lot of your job is to facilitate the sale of assets that are owned by people, right? And they want to make sure they like you. They want to make sure that you know what you're talking about, but also that you can walk them through it, and maybe they're a little challenged in certain areas. So I think as things get more advanced technologically, there's a lot of new prop tech companies. There's a lot of technology that's being leveraged in ways we've never seen before, and some of that's happening in the real estate space. That's very exciting. But I think that also means that you're going to have an increased demand for like people skills and like a human side of things to break things down. Because where those prop tech companies are going and growing, you have a bunch of folks who are just left in the dust, right? People who are not as savvy with the tech. So human skills, super important, I think, as we enter this technology wave.
Great. And how about you, Emily? Hard technical skills.
Yeah. So like Roman mentioned, I think it's always a blend, but I think some of the specific skills that my teams really look for across the board, I think Excel is really important, and it continues to be. Some of our analysts positions, they do test for Excel skills. So I think brushing up on financial modeling within Excel, like cash flow analysis. If you have exposure to Argus, it always helps. I think that's more important for some of our higher level roles, but it's not required for our more entry level roles. But I think if you are, not sure of, your skill set within a certain area, I think what's always important is to demonstrate to the employer or to the recruiter on, how you're working on that. So maybe you haven't had direct exposure using those, you haven't had used Argus experience on the job, but maybe you've used it in a class. Highlight that, highlight any trainings that you've done, free trainings on LinkedIn, any certifications. I think it's just impressive to the hiring managers when, you're showing that you're doing the work and that you're kind of brushing up on that skill, even if it isn't a strength, because that just shows how you'll perform as an employee.
Great. Go ahead, Jenna.
Yeah, I would say that something that we are always looking for in terms of technical skills are what are the different programs and like software tools that you're comfortable with using and you're familiar with. So that looks maybe different for everyone, but just to give some examples of kind of like the buzzwords that we look for and that we get excited about would be something like Excel, Smartsheets, Procore, P6, BIM. Many of you might be familiar with that. Many of you might learn it down the road, but those are definitely things that we are always looking for and we're excited to see. Similar to what Emily was saying, actually part of our recruiting process is sometimes we actually give candidates based on the levels some exercises to complete. We always say it's not like a pass or fail. It doesn't decide if you're getting position or not, but it's helpful for us to know from, let's say, an onboarding perspective, what are the trainings that would be helpful for you? But I'd say it definitely stands out to the team and a recruiter if you're able to kind of go over what are the different types of tools that you're comfortable with and maybe more fluent with or savvy, or you just feel like there's a degree of like you're familiar with it. So I'd say for us, that's always something that we are looking at for technical skills. The other thing I'll add to is for technical skills is creating like high level budgets and schedules. Do you have experience with that? Have you done it maybe in any of your coursework? Is that something you can speak to? Is it something, if you don't know, you're willing to learn? So I'd say that for technical, that's also something we look for.
Thank you for sharing that, Jenna, because what we hear in coaching a lot from students, especially in real estate, is they'll say that a lot of them are maybe weary to apply to a role because they don't feel like they're an expert in that software, and that usually is like what holds them back. So thank you for sharing that, because you've almost like debunked, right, this myth that you have to be an expert. So for the students in the room, right, we've heard it loud and clear that as long as you're able to express familiarity and willingness to learn, and how you've applied usage of that in your projects and things like that, like lean into how much you know versus kind of letting how much you don't know take over your ability to apply to the role. So thanks for that. So the next question I have was about like what you would call, I guess, non-technical or transferable skills or soft skills. And Romain mentioned like the human skills, right? But are there any other things to add beyond people skills? And this is for any of you.
Yeah, I can definitely jump into that. I appreciate kind of like that last part you added. I mean, I think it's a nice bridge to this, which is, as much as the technical is really important, we also always like to say, we feel like we can always supplement and teach anything that maybe needs to be supplemented, as long as you have the right attitude, right? Like if you are a go-getter, you want to learn, you want to be involved, you are curious, you're joining with this really just wanting to be involved. Our personal philosophy is learning and development and growth. And like we can supplement any of the technical skills that maybe need more training. What we really look for, and we actually have a huge part of our interview process is actually focusing like just on this, not even the technical, is like, what are your attitudes? Like, what is your approach? Like, how would you approach something if you don't know the answer and you don't know how to handle it? And are you someone that is willing to learn and you're curious about it? So I'd say that really being able to get that through in an interview is so important, because so many things that we do, it really can be taught. It's really more just about what are your attitudes about it, and do you want to learn? So it's a great question, and so much of our interview process, and I'd say so many places that you probably would interview, actually really investigates really that, and kind of what are your thoughts about that.
Great. So moving on to just tell us a little bit more about recruitment cycles, recruitment timelines, usual times of the year that you see most needs coming in, and maybe we'll start with Emily for this.
Sure. So for our full-time positions, we do hire on a rolling basis. As of now, I think that is changing. I will share our campus recruiting is a little bit more structured. Typically, positions will open up late August, September. So interviews typically would happen within that like October to November period, with a lot of offers going out by December. I think the majority of our capital markets positions were filled, right before the new year. That's, some of our other positions within JLL, like, brokerage or hotels or JREC, those positions, those internships, some of those positions are still open, but our capital markets positions do fill early. And I think that's just kind of a trend that we're seeing with a lot of the finance and accounting recruiting. We're trying to keep up. But with our full-time positions, as I mentioned, we are hiring on a rolling basis. So just something to think about if you're looking at an internship for next year, definitely, making sure you're ready for applying to those positions over the summer, maybe doing some networking, staying on top of our career site to see, what's available, maybe attending a career fair to meet with the recruiter if you want to kind of get more information. But as I mentioned, our talent network is a really great resource as well, but the full-time positions are kind of on an as-need basis. But I will share too, with our internship program, one of our goals is to really convert our interns to full-time. That's really, we want to invest, like Jenna mentioned, in early career talent, because that's really where the need is in the business. And so a great way to look for, a position for after graduation is to look for an internship now. And, also full-time positions are, still available too, but just wanted to share that, plug that for our internship program.
Great. Roman, do you want to hop in?
So for us, my company is a little boutique and entrepreneurial. I think, if you look up JLL, it's a very large company. Macro Savills, I think smaller than JLL, but still rather large. Greysteel's recruitment process has a very structured approach for internships. So if you're looking for a summer internship, it does follow some of those cadences. If you're looking for a full-time opportunity, there is a lot more flexibility, which can be interesting. So in terms of cycles, I'm actively looking to bring some folks on board, and I'm looking to fill that slot in the next 60 days. But nationally for my firm, because I'm in the New York office, we have offices in Texas, we have offices in California, we have offices in DC, and other places. So if you're looking for opportunities, there's tremendous demand, like I said, just because of the market conditions.
Right. Jenna, anything to add from your
end?
end?
I'll say that we also are recruiting always on a rolling basis, which means all times during the year, we're always looking to make connections with candidates, and we're always hiring. Just to kind of give some context about why that is, it's because our projects are always changing. We always have a lot of different, sometimes our projects are grown, sometimes we have new projects really starting. And so our projects are just kind of always changing. And so we're always looking to hire. So that's a little bit kind of what that looks like. We do have summer internship opportunities as well, just if someone is looking to do something more short term with an opportunity to be hired potentially full-time after you graduate. In terms of kind of timeline and really what that looks like, and there's some really great questions already going on kind of in the chat, and I'm happy to kind of use this opportunity. If you are graduating, let's say in like December, I'd say a really great timeline to maybe start applying would be sometime in the fall, and really let the recruiter that you're working with know I'm graduating in December, and really start your interviews potentially, in the fall timeline, so that once you graduate, you might already have this lined up. I'd say if you were to do it any earlier, at least I can speak in terms of macro, sometimes it's challenging because if we were to do interviews in the summer, our projects look really different in the winter time. So it's always just helpful to maybe do it a little bit closer to your timeline of when you would be graduating. It's a little bit of what that looks like for us.
Yeah. And, I'll add this question. I will say that I gave the speaker sort of a general sense of what we were going to be talking about today, but this question just came up. And, there are a lot of folks, we have a really robust master's program, right, in real estate. And sometimes we hear from students, they come in with the idea that an internship is not necessarily for them, right? They're in a master's program because what we typically, associate internships with is undergraduate students, early talent. So looking at, Emily specifically, can you just sort of, what's your message to, those graduate level students who maybe have some preconceived notions about what an internship might look like for them?
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I will say, so I don't manage early careers recruiting, but just based on the candidates that I've interacted with for full-time, we've hired a lot of MBA level interns, MSRE level interns. So it's definitely an advantage to try to explore an internship if you can during your master's program, especially if you focused in something else for undergrad. Like we see a lot of people who kind of came in with like, let's say like equity research or investment banking or even just a financial analyst. Things are all relevant to capital markets and real estate, but they don't have demonstrated real estate experience on their resume. Not to say that that couldn't land you a position full time, but it definitely really helps to have that real estate specific, designated interest on your resume. So an internship is a great way to do that. Like I think Jenna mentioned regarding like part-time opportunities, sometimes there is a need for someone to hire a part-time student as well throughout the year. I think that's becoming more of a trend. So if you miss the internship window, that's something that it's more on a kind of one-off basis that comes about more through networking. So definitely encourage you to build your network with professionals who are working in the field. That's something I've seen happen, and I think in general, any way that you can get experience within the industry that you're looking in, and like if you're looking in capital markets specifically, getting that capital market specific experience will really help your full-time search.
Awesome. So we talked about sort of the landscape, we talked about recruiting cycles and skills. So let's shift over to this next segment where it's really focusing on the different job search phases, from networking to applying to interviewing and negotiating. And I appreciate that you mentioned networking, because this leads me to our first question. What we'll say is networking is important. I think, if you're a student here, that by now you've heard that. But there's still some, questions around, well, how do I do that? And I reach out to people, but they don't respond. So as recruiters, Romain, as a hiring manager, you probably get hit up on LinkedIn all the time. So what makes you respond or not respond to outreach from a student or a job seeker? Let's go to Jenna for this one.
Yeah, I can also kind of give a helpful trick to this as well. If someone is not responding to you, feel free to just connect with anyone at the company. It doesn't even have to be the hiring manager. It doesn't have to be someone from HR. Oftentimes, most of the messages that I get are actually from someone else in the company who's like, hey, this person reached out to me on LinkedIn. And then I will then directly connect with them because someone's flagging that for me. A lot of times your message could kind of just be in a pile of other messages. So, that's just a helpful trick. Like, feel free to reach out to really anyone to network within the company. It doesn't have to be specific to a hiring manager or someone who works on the recruiting team. But something that I will say that does stand out to me as well is you do want to be really mindful and intentional and deliberate about the message that you are sending. I can't tell you how often I get messages where it just feels like it's kind of like a casual text almost that I'm getting, and it stands out to someone who might want to hire you full time. Are those the types of messages you might send to clients? I'd say that before an interview even starts, that's already your interview starting. It's how you're presenting yourself. So I'd say that definitely matters, really, the way that you do your outreach. And then the last part that I'll say too is you want to try to make it as easy as possible for the team, for the hiring manager, and say, what time works best for you? A lot of times candidates will be like, I can only talk from 1 to 1:15 on this day, and it's really limited. And then oftentimes we may not be able to connect because that's really limited availability. So you want to make yourself as available as possible for them. I'd say that's a helpful trick and something that stands out to me when I'm responding to messages.
Thanks, Jenna. Emily. And also there are some questions in the chat. So Emily, I know you're chiming in there too, so thanks for that. But Jenna and Romain, if you see questions in there that you want to go ahead and answer, feel free to type in. But Emily, same question. What makes you respond or not respond to outreach on LinkedIn?
No, and I really hear you as a student. You want to get in touch with these, recruiters and hiring managers. And sometimes when you have multiple positions open, I'm often recruiting for 50 positions at once. So the messages can get a little overwhelming in LinkedIn. So something that's helped me kind of pay attention to students who reach out through LinkedIn to me is someone who sends their resume. They've designated a position of interest specifically, and it's on a role that I'm recruiting for. So sometimes I'll get people looking for like a project management role or a role on a team that I don't recruit for. Obviously, I can't respond to all of those messages. But people who have specifically designated a certain position or location, sent me that link, sent me their resume so I can review to see if they're a fit, I'm very likely to respond and schedule a meeting with those candidates. But so I think it just depends on doing your research. Sometimes you'll get more, vaguely worded messages saying that they're interested in opportunities, but haven't identified a specific opportunity. So I think candidates that show that, they're really, hungry and they're, interested in a specific role and that they're a fit, those are the ones that, I'm more likely to be able to, connect with.
Sounds good. Okay, so the next phase, applying, and we'll stick with Emily and Jenna for this one, but Roman will bring you in for the next one on interviewing. So applying, how do you read resumes? What stands out? What are the things that you're looking for? Emily, let's start with you and then go back to Jenna.
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually just created, for one of our committees, we have a committee on diversity and inclusion, on helping our hiring managers, see really great talent based on the resume and thinking outside the box. So something that I really look for is involvement in student organizations. So if you're involved in the real estate club, if you've, had, similar skills within your internships, maybe it hasn't been an internship in real estate, but you've done, financial modeling within this certain internship, real estate clubs, internship experience. I think just involvement throughout university is really helpful. And any leadership experience as well always really stands out.
Jenna?
Yeah, I would say that you want to make it as easy to read and follow for the reader. You really want to think about it as if someone was viewing this, what is like the easiest way for them to really kind of navigate? It's almost like a roadmap what your resume is. And you really want to figure out what would be the easiest way for me to kind of portray myself that is easiest and best for the reader. I'd also say consistency is actually really huge. I know that might sound obvious, but you'd definitely be surprised sometimes about the different types of maybe inconsistencies that you might find on a resume. So I'd say when you're building yours out, you just want to make sure it's consistent. If you, for example, bold all of your jobs, you want to make sure it's not just your recent job that's bolded, but all of them are. Like, consistency is key. And it's really the first time that someone is really getting an impression of who you are and what type of work you're creating. So I'd say that those are really the two main things that would stand out.
Okay. And a question came in the chat. Are there any red flags when looking at candidates? And this also actually might tie into the interviewing bit. So let's fold that into this next piece, which is, what do you feel are the common mistakes you see in interviews? So maybe that's a way to bring in that red flag question, but also what stands out in interviews. So let's go to Roman for this one.
So for the red flags, I'm gonna sort of skip over that because I think for me with interviews, like, there's just a lot of things where, hey, like, it tips you off that it's not the great interview, the great candidate. For me, I want to talk more about like what is great, right? And I think from the lens of an interviewer, like, right away, you kind of know if somebody's like good, like if they're talking your language, if they know the role, if they have the requisite experience, and they can answer the questions effectively. Like, a lot of times that just shines out in my opinion. And so then in lieu of that, it's pretty easy. There's a lot of different things that just might not work out. So focusing on those things that make you great, it's like being excited to be there, right? I always love that. I always love when the person understands the role. I think that there are interviews where I conduct them and I'm sort of educating the person on the role, and there are interviews where they already know the role fully, and so then our conversation can just be that much deeper, right? It's like that's the table stakes, and now we're actually having a conversation. So if you can do that, that's really powerful. And then obviously, you're not going to fully know the role, right? It'd be hard to unless you've had the role before. And you've definitely not had the role at that company. So then it's like wanting to come out of the interview with a better understanding, I think, is always really attractive to me, because then it's like, okay, this candidate really wants to know about this role because they want this role, right? They really want to know what it's like to sort of, work for a week on a model or a deliverable, right? Like, are you going to get coached? All those things really contribute. And then there's, if you're interviewing for certain firms that have more structured process, you may want to make sure that okay, if they're going to ask you technical questions, make sure you know all the technical questions, right? So I would just say kind of come prepared and just really think about it and don't take it casually. Like it's a big deal. Every interview is a big deal. Get excited, be prepared, and just give it all you got.
Thanks for that, Roman. Jenna?
Yeah, I would say that red flags that definitely do stand out is when a candidate does not come prepared with questions for that might feel like it's an obvious thing. You're preparing for an interview. Of course, you should do questions, but you'd definitely be surprised. You want to come with questions. You even want to maybe even show the interviewers, not only do I have questions in my head, but I wrote them down in a list. Like I did my homework, I am here and I am prepared. So I'd say that when a candidate doesn't come with questions, oftentimes it gets us thinking like, how much did they really research macro? How much are they really like investing in this role? And oftentimes in feedback, that might actually really come up about a candidate. Like, you know, they were great, but they didn't come with any questions. Like how should we feel about that? So that could be a red flag. I do recommend always coming prepared with questions. And I'd say that things that stand out actually, and this is why questions are so important, it's really doing your research. I think showing that you actually looked into the company that you are interviewing for, you care, you maybe before the interview, if you are able to get the names of the people who are interviewing you and do some research on them. And during the interview, like show you did your research, say, hey, I know you came up with this program at the company. I'd love to hear more about it. I'd say that that's something that really stands out to the interviewers and shows that you're invested in them and who they are in the company.
Thank you for bringing up the preparing questions. And maybe this is actually another good way to ask you, because what we'll hear from students is I'll say, I have an interview with the recruiter, which is usually like the first round, right? But they don't know which questions to direct to who. Like, is this question appropriate for this round or for like the hiring manager? So could you just share what are some examples of questions that would be appropriate to ask more in the first round for the recruiters, and then Roman, maybe give some examples of questions that you've heard that would be more appropriate for asking someone on the hiring side.
Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Emily. I'm curious to hear what you're going to say as well.
I was just going to say, I mean, even if the question isn't necessarily like appropriate for the recruiter, I still encourage you to ask it, because if it's a well-researched question, it's still going to come across positively. I think as long as you're preparing questions and that there are things that aren't just found on the website, I think that those are always received positively. But as far as, specific questions that candidates ask, I'll just usually let the candidate know if that's something that's better saved for the team. But just in general, things to think about for asking recruiters specifically, asking about the culture at JLL or the firm you're interviewing at, asking about the team or the hiring timeline, what the team is looking for in an ideal candidate. Those are all things that we're typically well versed on and ready to answer. Asking specific questions regarding like how many deals a team is doing a month and those types of things that are more industry specific. I typically just let the candidate know, that's a great question for the team, but I don't have any information on that. So, but just in general, thinking about your audience is always helpful. But yeah, that's a great question.
Jenna?
Yeah, that was perfect. I'd say like the one other thing that I would add, and I actually say this to candidates all the time, which is just as much as we are interviewing you, you're also interviewing us. You want to make sure that this is the right fit for you and really the right next step. So I would also, just really recommend that when you're asking questions, it should really kind of like come from the heart of like, what are things you actually care about? Like, do you care about growth? Do you care about a company's culture? You want to also make sure this is really the right next step for you. And your question should be like genuine about that. I think you could definitely craft some really great questions about a company, but you should also really use it as a time to actually ask things that you care about and really want to know about a company.
Thanks, Jenna. And Roman, how about you? What are questions that you like hearing from candidates?
I think Emily and Jenna put it well. You want to know like who you're interviewing with, recruiter, hiring manager. Those are just very different interviews. And so I mean, questions I like hearing about are like, what's the job actually like? You know, what's a typical day in your life? What was a challenging deal you worked on? Right? It's like content specific, job specific, whereas I think the recruiting questions are more like, what is the process like? What is high level JLL like? Whereas if you ask me, it's like, okay, what is it like to like be working on a day to day? So yeah, I think they explained it really well.
Cool. And so the next or the last phase, right, of this segment of job search phase is talking about negotiating, and then we'll open it up to questions from the students. So students, feel free to start thinking of questions to plug into the chat. So negotiating, how would you advise job seekers to approach the negotiation process? Is it common, you know, a misconception or a perception that people have is they'll say, well, you know, this is just my first position, so they probably wouldn't be open to negotiating. So just tell us a little bit more about what that looks like in your world and how folks can best prepare to approach that, Jenna and Emily.
Yeah, I think it's like a question that you can actually have really early on. Don't feel like you need to shy away from it. In fact, I think oftentimes it's actually really appreciated. You know, no one wants to go through all the way throughout a process just to only at the very end figure out actually we might not really be aligned on this, just out of respect for your time, but also really out of respect for the team's time as well, and taking the time to get to know you more and really interview you. So I'd say it's a conversation that you can actually really have from the beginning. You can actually ask, like, what would you say the compensation range typically is for a role like this? And then when the conversation comes up, I'd say that's something that you can say just early on so that the recruiter knows right away, is you can say maybe a range that you are also looking for, a number that maybe you just feel like you can't go down as well. And I'd say that from there, if the recruiter then decides to kind of take you throughout the interview process, I'd say that it's good to know right from the very beginning kind of what your expectations are and really where your head is at. I'd say with interviewing, it definitely can be a timely process. A lot of our team members are taking a lot of time during their day to interview candidates. So we're very intentional about every interview that we do. We don't want to take up someone's time if we are not serious about it. So I'd say from the very beginning, it's something that you can flag and have that conversation about. And then if it's something that is continued and pursued, I think that you can know, well, I explained and kind of said what my expectations were and kind of say it right off the bat.
Thanks. Emily?
Yeah, I think Jenna put it really well. I think the range is really important to kind of know going into that initial conversation with the recruiter. So think about what would be the minimum salary that you would be happy to accept, as well as what would be your ideal salary. So kind of have that range in mind. And then that's really kind of that initial point just to see if you're aligned with the budget of the position. And then from there, you really wouldn't, discuss the salary until, it came to offer with the hiring team. And at that point with negotiating, I think it's always really important to first be able to do your research and kind of connect, why you're asking for more in terms of, salary, and being able to bring, about really great data points about, why you'd be the best fit for this position. And then have that conversation with the team. Definitely don't be afraid to bring it up, because at that point that you're, negotiating an offer and that you've had an offer given by the team, they've invested so much time in you, and they've invested, so much time in getting to know you, and they really are excited about offering you the opportunity. So it's definitely doesn't look bad to ask, as long as you're, kind of staying within the range of what's market for the position, and then see where things go. I think, but yeah, as far as kind of that initial recruiter conversation, just be prepared with that, range of, I would say, give it at least like, a $10,000 range from what would be your minimum versus what would be your ideal salary.
Right. Thank you for that. So that concludes our formal set of questions. We're opening it up for questions now from the group. I see a bunch here, so let's try to get through those. And then if we have time, we'll try to get you all a chance to be able to ask the questions yourselves. And I'll just try to run through these quickly and direct them to people specifically. So let's go to Jenna for this one. Outside website and internet, what are some of the ways you suggest students to research about your companies? You're the one who brought up researching.
Yeah, really good question. And I'd say that something before an interview you should always do is actually look at the company's LinkedIn page, because that's really telling you things that are happening in real time, maybe things that happened that week. And it's so cool on an interview to say like, hey, I saw you guys had this DEI speaker this week. I'd love to hear more about that in your culture. And it's a cool moment to say like, I'm keeping up in real time with things that are happening at your company and what's going on. So in addition to the research you're doing, I'd say looking at a company's LinkedIn page is a really great way to kind of see what's going on in a company and kind of the hot topics that they're currently talking about and being able to talk about that.
Cool. Roman, let's give you this question. What is your view on employment gaps for recent graduates? What do you want to see in candidates? What do you want to have seen them do during that time besides applying to jobs, brushing up on soft and technical skills, etc.?
I think it depends on the, so I'll take off my broker hat and just give like a general question. I think also the recruiters could answer this perhaps better than I could. So I'll keep it quick. I think it depends on how long the job gap is. If it's longer, then it needs more of an explanation. If it's not that long, then less. If you're a younger student, then it's not as important. If you're a little bit older, more important. And no matter what, you just need to be able to like put together a good answer for it.
Let's give you that one too, actually, Emily, since you would probably see that first. Employment gaps.
Yeah, I think like Roman mentioned, it's just important to be able to explain, what was happening during that time, and being able to be prepared to answer that question because you might be asked that by the team. But I don't, when I'm reviewing resumes, I don't review or I don't view employment gaps as necessarily a negative because it really depends on the overall package of the candidate. So that doesn't deter me from sending candidates forward. At some, points, it's something that I have to kind of revisit with the team and being able to kind of articulate why there was this gap and be able to kind of advocate for the candidate. But it's definitely something that, taking on additional trainings and networking and being involved in your field and even taking a position that maybe isn't necessarily exactly what you want to do, but it's a step in the right direction just during that time to be able to show that you're working towards that is definitely a great way to get back on track if you have a gap.
Yeah, correct. I don't know if this is 100% true, but I think I heard from someone that LinkedIn is actually rolling out a feature now where you can include, like gaps in your profile. So look into it. More to come on that. How should students who will be relocating to a different state after school handle interviews in New York City? Is it better to interview in New York City first and then communicating intentions to relocate?
I think that that's something you should just communicate right from the beginning. I think that it's not the greatest thing to go through an entire interview process just to at the very end be like, and by the way, I will be relocating. It often actually could be something where there might be a lot of opportunities in the market that you are looking to relocate. So I'd say it's up to maybe the company how they then want to go about the interview process. Maybe they will also do it in New York. They might have more team members who are in that market that you're relocating to interview you. But I'd say it's something you should definitely flag in the very beginning of a process.
And this other question, NYU has a large international student population. So what are you seeing in terms of the hiring or what this looks like for international students? Because I think, just putting it out there, yes, there are some challenges in terms of limitations rather when it comes to work authorization, things like that. So could you just tell us a little bit about how international students can be set up for success as they approach their job search?
Yeah, I can definitely speak towards that as well. And again, it's a good question because it might be different at every single company. So I can kind of speak about it in the lens of macro. I'd say that if you do need any type of like work authorization or sponsorship, it's just something you'd want to share in the beginning. Every company might kind of have their own set of work authorizations that they're able to do for a year. So it's totally possible. It's just something that in the very beginning, if you kind of know what that looks like for you, it's something you would just want to share. In fact, going back to that other question about what are good questions to ask in one of those first conversations, this is a great one. You can say like, what does that look like for international candidates? So I would say it's just something to ask.
Great. And this other one, and then Farhan, I see your hand is up and we'll get to you. How important are employee referrals when applying to a role?
I can speak to that one. So we do see it in our system, Workday, if a employee referred a candidate. So it is something we notice on the recruiting end, but I think it depends on how active that referral is given. So for example, if the candidate, applies and they apply with the, employee referral kind of designation, that's kind of like the least active, option. If the, employee contacts the recruiter and lets them know, hey, this candidate would be a really great fit because of XYZ, here's their resume, that's more likely to get passed along in the process and have more attention driven to it. So I think if you're using your referrals strategically, like if it's someone that maybe you interned with previously or worked with previously, ask if they can advocate, for you to the recruiter. Obviously it has to depend on the relationship. If you have a strong relationship with that person, I'm sure they'd be happy to do that, but that just, gets a little bit more visibility to your application. But it definitely does, even if it is a more passive referral, it's something that we do notice. But it's not, as, much of a, determining factor, rather, whether or not that candidate is hired.
So Farhan, I'm gonna turn it to you to unmute yourself and ask your question. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna throw up the email addresses actually of our speakers today. So you all have a chance to take that down and follow up. Farhan, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey folks, so apologies, my camera is giving me some trouble today, but I just want to thank you to the panelists for your time. I have two questions. One is, how should the resume grow? So starting after undergrad, you're told that one-page resume is the best way to go, but after that, after graduate school, if you have some experience and growing experience, maybe 5 or 10 or 15 years, how should that resume grow from 1 page to 2 page to maybe like, I think maybe 3 pages is probably the max, but I would like some insight on that. And then the second question is, if you guys can talk about remote work and not just work from home, but remote work in general and the positions that are open right now for remote work and how people in different cities should apply to jobs in other cities and how all that is working for your companies.
Yeah, those are really good questions. And thank you for asking that. So just to kind of jump into the first one, I know Emily also, I think, wrote some insight as well in the chat about it. But I would say it really depends kind of where you're at in terms of your career and your industry experience. If you have been working already for years and you have enough experience to kind of put on a 2-page resume, I'd say often how I have seen it broken out, which I think is really helpful, is if you kind of put your own experience, like your work experience, your education kind of on 1 page, and maybe the second page is like your project experience, the different types of projects you have worked on, and really a project list. That is one way to organize it. But I'd say that if you are maybe you have been in the industry for a little bit longer and you do have that experience, definitely I'd say you can feel free to add that on to maybe 2 pages. You definitely don't want to not share any of your really enriching experiences that you may have had just because of that. So I'd say that that's okay. Before I jump into your second question, though, I know this was something Emily did comment on. I just want to see if Emily, you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, no, that's a really great response. I think with the resume, you want to think about it as a highlight, a career highlight. So, and also too, with the 1 versus 2 page, like you mentioned, if you have that relevant experience that would justify 2 pages, it's definitely not looked upon, in a negative way. But I would say, like, as far as the ordering, thinking about, obviously most resumes are typically like reverse chronological order. But I think on the recruiting end, anything that's really relevant to the position, if you can try to include that towards the top, I think that really, helps your experience to stand out a little bit more.
Yeah.
And the question on remote work.
Yeah. And then for remote work, this definitely, I think, is different for every company. It's something you should totally ask. It's a really great question. And when you're on that first phone call, maybe with like the hiring manager, definitely ask that. I'm happy to kind of speak in terms of like macro, what that looks like. We have definitely taken a very flexible approach. It definitely kind of depends on the project that you might be working on. Some projects might be a little bit more heavy in terms of like the client wanting you to go on site a little bit, but for the most part, we've taken a very flexible approach. It's really up to every single person, what they want to do, what they're comfortable with. there are definitely some folks who go into the office like most days a week. Some people go in once a week, and some people may not have been in for weeks or at all in months. It's like totally up to every single person what they're comfortable with. So it's a great question. I'd see it is different really depending on the company's expectations, depending on the project expectations, the client expectations. So it's a great question. It does vary kind of depending on what you're working on. So I would encourage you to ask, that's like a great question to ask, kind of talking about what types of questions to ask on maybe one of your initial phone calls with the company.
Yeah, agreed. Great question to ask in the initial phone call. I will share, it depends on the team as well. Capital markets, the culture, they are really going into the office. But there is still that flexibility, obviously, and safety is always first, but that's just kind of the culture of those teams. And it can really vary office to office, but when in doubt, ask your recruiter, ask the team. It's not going to look negatively upon you to, ask more information, but I think it's just helpful to kind of do your research and prepare for, which type of environment is really a fit for what you're looking for in your career.
Great. I think we have time for this last question. Thanks, Benjamin. What do you recommend for undergraduate freshmen to do to bolster their resumes early on in their career? So to essentially set them up for internships while they're in undergrad.
I can answer that one.
Yeah.
I would say just do something, right? Do something related to real estate. If you want to be a developer, you don't have to get a development internship. You could be a broker. You could be an appraiser. You could be on the lending side. Like, do something that shows interest, and then that'll give you like really cool things to talk about, right? And that's what makes the good interview. You can intern somewhere for 2 months. You got insight into this cool project, and then now like significantly more than somebody who didn't intern, right? And you can use those stories and those narratives. Like, you can take the work that those folks were doing where you interned and sort of make it a little bit your own, right? Obviously you're an intern, so you weren't leading the project, but just do that internship, do it somewhere in the CRE sector. That's what I'd recommend.
Thanks. Okay, I lied. This will be the last question. Emily, what do you think of folks who apply to multiple roles?
Oh, I saw that question. It's a great one. So I will say it's fine to apply to multiple positions, especially if you're interested in multiple locations in the firm. So a lot of my, early career, students that are graduating in, May, for example, they might be open to moving to different cities. So they've applied to a few different analyst positions across the country. That definitely doesn't look negative. It can be a little overboard when you see that a student's applied to like 50 positions. So I think just try to keep it to what are the positions that you're really most excited about, and definitely don't limit yourself to opportunities that you're not necessarily interested in. So I think just trying to keep it a little bit focused to really what genuinely are you most excited about. But I don't think it necessarily looks negatively to apply to a dozen or so positions. It just, when things get a little bit crazy with that number, we do notice that.
Great. Okay, so that was the last question. We're at the top of the hour now. You have everyone's email addresses here. So thank you to our panelists for joining us today, and also for being open to outreach from the folks here today. For those who RSVP'd to the event, we are sending your resumes to the group here, to Jenna, Emily, and Romain. So you want to make sure that your resumes are uploaded on a handshake by the end of day on Monday, so we can send that over to them next week. I think that was it, but thank you so much again to Jenna, Emily, Romain, and of course to everyone who joined today. And we're looking forward to staying in touch, and enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. It's great meeting you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.